Now, it is 11:45. Now, the members of the Hauraki Golf Forum, who are they again? You've got a meeting starting at 12? And can I just check, was the intention to break for a lunch for 1 hour to allow the forum to convene its meeting and then the members were able to return?
It's with the minister.
Okay, so it's a meeting with the minister.
Yeah.
And, okay. Okay. So I'm just trying to work out the time here because I think well, I was just wondering whether we needed to have a break to discuss the item, having just, as I promised you, remember, earlier in the piece, or would you like to go into the item?
I'm easy. I'm sure. Let's go for it.
Okay, good. Okay, we will go back to item 11, and that's on page 117. And this is a paper that was deferred twice. It's been on our audit paper twice, and it is back here today. So Tony Reedy is the principal writer of the report. And John, just due to some questions that have come through, I've also asked John Hutton, who's from our Treaty Settlements Office as well, to be with us. John, come up now, it's good. And John Duguid, of course. Now, maybe I think it's best to recap. We had it on the order paper twice, we deferred, and how we've addressed the areas of concern, what's transpired since then, and what is the most recent issues. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably hand over to Tony in a second. And actually, if it's okay, we may just start by summarising the broad findings of the original report, and then address the issues that were raised by members of the Independent Māori Statutory Board when they reviewed the paper that was on the previous agenda in June. So I'll hand over to Tony just to talk broadly about the findings of the report and the task that we were set some 6 months ago by the Planning Committee.
Thank you, Sean. Good morning, Mr. Chair and councillors and board members. Just recapping, I'll just talk for a few minutes on the key findings of the report, and then, as John says, we'll move on to the issues that have been raised. So we were tasked with a task to identify if there were any open space opportunities associated with unformed legal roads, or they're commonly referred to as paper roads. And the short answer is yes, there are. There are opportunities to secure additional open space recreation facilities via unformed legal roads or road reserve. A lot of these opportunities are currently being identified through existing mechanisms such as our greenway plans, our open space network plans, structure plans, area plans, centre plans. But perhaps the greatest opportunity is through the Auckland Paths project, which is investigating or looking at walking and cycling opportunities, and a lot of those involve paper roads. Then the report identifies the processes that you'd need to go through if you were looking at stopping a road, and it's governed by the Local Government Act, Public Works Act, Marine and Coastal Area Act as well. So road stopping is not a straightforward process. It can be appealed to the Environment Court if anyone is dissatisfied with the closure or stopping. The report concludes we need to really consider it on a case-by-case basis. You can't really do an Auckland-wide approach because there's so many variables involved. A key part of that is engagement with iwi and local boards through the processes, and that's already occurring through the existing road stopping processes, as I'm advised by AT. And then, of course, there's as mentioned in the report, stop roads may need to be offered back to former landowners, and that includes iwi as well. As identified by the IMSB in our discussions with them after the June report was deferred, and the report probably didn't go into this in a lot of into any detail, but we've added sections on this now. So with road stopping, there are opportunities to achieve a lot of positive outcomes for Maori, obviously. The report identifies some of those opportunities: protection of sites of significance, protection and management of cultural landscapes, enabling customary rights to occur, to be undertaken, enhancing water quality, enabling Maori cultural values, history and heritage to be reflected in the landscape. So there are some real positive outcomes that can be achieved through that. And also in the report, and John may want to speak to that in a little bit later on, I also identified there's a lot of innovative approaches being undertaken throughout Auckland, the country and overseas to secure additional open space recreation facilities. A lot of these don't require road stopping or road closing, and the report provides some examples of those. And in an increasing urban area, these sorts of innovative opportunities will need to be looked at in the future, and parks are certainly on board with that. And as the report identifies, these are occurring already. So I'll now just hand over to John. Do you want to add anything?
No, I think, apologies. I think, Tony, you've adequately covered things, so we're really just here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. Just a question at the outset. I've got my previous report. You emphasise the costs of stopping roads, but are there not other ways to legitimise activities? They could be passive activities. You could legitimise, say, walking and cycling, and say no to private vehicles without stopping a road, because we do that all the time in many other roads. So there's an assumption here that the cost of stopping roads is the big barrier, but I don't see in the report all the other mechanisms that are at our disposal to actually open up these places to people without necessarily going through the big task of stopping a road.
You're quite right, Mr. Chair, and I think the report does identify a non-road stopping option, and that would be our recommendation because, as you say, walking and cycling can occur on paper roads, unformed legal roads, as of right, and the Auckland Paths project will certainly not need to stop roads to be able to utilise those unformed paper roads as part of their network. So there is definitely that option.
Okay, there is. So we don't necessarily have to jump to that conclusion. There are other instruments. The road that goes from a road as we physically see it and recognise it through a neighbourhood and punches out into another road, a laneway or walkway, which is technically a road. Are you confident that those assets that are actually on Auckland Transport's asset register are all properly maintained as connecting laneways currently?
I wouldn't be able to answer that, Mr. Chair. I'm aware of some laneways in my local area that I utilise on my runs, but they seem to be in relatively good condition, but I wouldn't know across the region. But we can certainly make inquiries with AT on that and come back to you.
Because the paper says that those and the road ends that abut the CMA are recognised as open space now, but they don't show up as open space. And can you just reconcile that? Because I don't quite understand that. That they are viewed as open space, but they're not managed as open space, is my understanding.
That's correct. They're still... the ownership's still with AT, but that for all intents and purposes, they look like parks. These are the road ends that often lead down to coastal areas. The actual formed and sealed road falls short of the Esplanade Reserve, and there's often a portion of unformed road that looks and feels like a park, but as I understand it, it's still within AT's asset database.
We've got something like 512 of those.
Yes, according to the GIS analysis,
That is the 512 parcels of land adjacent to the CMA, and that you're saying are viewed as open space, but they're not utilised as open space.
some of them are utilised, I think.
Generally, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Questions, members? Questions on the paper? Look, I'll move at the outset, I'll move the recommendations as they are, but I am expecting an amendment. So do I have a second, please? Councillor Holtz, thank you. So just to put it up there. Other questions, please? Member Namani.
Kia ora. Just a couple of questions. With the report that you have provided, you're looking at 521 sites?
Yeah, that's correct. In terms of the GIS analysis that was undertaken, that's correct.
Did you delve in, because I appreciate if you just did a GIS analysis, but did you delve into just confirming the underlying ownership of the 521 sites?
No, we didn't, no.
So there could be a potential for some of those 521 sites not to be council owned. Like,
Yeah, that's correct. I think, a lot of them would be in the AT asset database, but there could be some non-council.
but there could be some Crown land in there. Like, I mean, I think the point is
Could be some
we
Crown
kinda
land, that's
don't know.
correct. Yeah, that's correct.
If it's Crown land, it wouldn't even fall into scope of this policy, would it? Unless the Crown decided.
Unless the Crown decided to stop the road, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess one thing I wasn't clear of was if they decide to stop a road, like, is that Crown land? Does it go into surplus land?
As I understand, John may be able to add in here, but it becomes available for treaty settlement.
Yeah, the report does mention this at paragraph 80. So if it's Crown land and it's not needed for that purpose and the road's stopped and the Crown wishes to dispose of it, it would then be, broadly in Auckland, in most parts of Auckland, it would be subject to the Tamaki Collective RFR.
Yeah, thanks. In scoping up the report and looking at the opportunities just based on previous, I guess, matters we've raised as the IMSB, around opportunities for mana whenua with some of these areas. I'm right, aren't I, that this report is kind of focused down on the opportunities that are available for Māori really do fit within quite a narrow scope of if council decide to stop the road, it will be subject to the public works process, road stopping, and if Māori were the original owners, they'll be offered it back or purchase. That process will happen.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Nothing else. Like no other possible opportunity. For example, if the land was, I don't know, take the Mahurangi purchase, known to be quite well known, some of the historical grievances around that with mana whenua. If one of those 521 sites are located perhaps on next to a site of value or significance to mana whenua, or maybe next to a papakainga, or perhaps a reserve that was never set aside back in the day, this approach that you're seeking for us to be endorsed isn't going to cover those kind of things.
That's correct. The approach was fairly narrow in that it was looking at the opportunities for acquiring additional open space.
Yeah.
Yep.
Even, you're aware that even the Public Works Act itself hasn't been that great for Māori.
Yes, no, I'm aware of that, yes.
But that's the process we are endorsing
That's
within
all.
this bunch of resolutions. Okay. the other questions are, where do the Auckland Paths project, existing greenway plans, open space network plans, structure plans as the primary tools, how does that process fold in then, even if it's just as narrow as road stopping? How do we ensure that process is filled into those? And I guess that's touching on perhaps my colleague's reference to the next agenda item.
I suppose our conclusion was you really need to get down into the detail to look at these areas, and these sorts of plans that the council's currently preparing do enable us to get down into more detail into specific areas. Structure plans, the open space network plans, greenway plans are local board based, so you are able to look at that area in more detail.
Okay, so there's no intention of any kind of regional look at all these areas of land and how they might be secured for open space, like in any kind. It's going to be dealt with in the context of.
Yeah, that's correct. The conclusion I came to was we've got a lot of work underway already, and it is picking up on these opportunities, and you really do need to get down into the detail to. It's a case by case basis, really.
Yeah, I guess
given the
that's
history of
been
the
one of
land.
my concerns. We haven't got back in, down into the detail, I guess, of some of the concerns we've had. But thank you.
Thanks.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I could just add, and on that theme, one of the key changes between this version of the report and its recommendations and the previous one from last month was the addition of recommendations C, which pick up on some of the themes in the discussion we just had with from the IMSB. So recommendation C, and it's really, sorry, the numbering's incorrect on the hard copy on the screen. I think it's H now. H2 in particular, and there is an amendment there based on some input from John Hutton, just to clarify or not cause confusion in terms of Council's role versus the Crown in terms of treaty settlements. So we have proposed an amendment there, which is really around achieving positive outcomes for Māori. But I guess that's where we've tried to acknowledge that when Council is undertaking the Auckland Paths project, those greenway plans, open space network plans and so on, and structure planning, those are the mechanisms where we should be looking at the recreation opportunities of unformed legal roads and road ends, but also the opportunities for Māori, which was not a strong theme or much of a theme at all, and we acknowledged that in the previous report. So we have worked with IMSB Secretariat to bring through that acknowledgement that as part of these projects that we've referenced, Council should be looking at outcomes for Māori and not just primarily looking at it from a recreation open space perspective.
Thank you, John. Other questions there? Oh, Councillor Walker, you've got the report now?
At the scope, and there's a category of land that I'd suggest that should be in here, and it isn't necessarily an unformed legal road or a road reserve, but we've got land that's been acquired for transport projects, sometimes decades ago. It may well be being used as akin to a park now. That sort of area should be in scope. I'm thinking particularly of a couple of locations on Whangaproa that would be ideal acquisitions as part of the parks network. And similarly, there's an area of land that I know of in Greenhithe that is a similar category. It happens to be access to a wharf that's no longer there, but it's used by the community as effectively as a reserve. So can we widen the scope to include land that might be held or designated for transport purposes?
Through the chair, I believe the report already acknowledges that it's not just the paper roads, it's also areas of road reserve that aren't being utilised for road, which would include the sorts of land that I think you're referring to that are part of the road reserve, but they're not required for road purposes.
Some of these areas actually aren't road reserve. Okay, I mean one is, but there are others that aren't. They may have been acquired for a transport project, but they're just in abeyance. For example, we've got a very large project that impacts on Whangapraoa and also Stillwater called Penlink, and that corridor includes areas of land, one of which was previously a reserve, but it's been altered, and other areas of land that have got substantial stands of bush and the like on them that are almost certainly not going to be required for that project, but should have an opportunity to be looked at by parks.
So, Mr Chair, Auckland Transport, if it's an Auckland Transport asset, they are continually looking at areas of land that they own and no longer require, and what that land may be used for, and that would come through the appropriate committee. They work, I think, as you know, with Panuku on those sorts of land, and that they come through Finance and Performance Committee if there's any proposal to divest of them, at which point...
Sure, I understand all of that. My comment is this is another category that's not on here. There are other categories, a number of which that are under Auckland Transport that are effectively being covered off here. So why wouldn't you widen it so it was sufficiently comprehensive?
Okay, so...
And the wording in that respect is pretty simple.
Okay, so this, the instruction for this paper goes back a year, and it has been on the order paper twice, and we've been wanting to address some matters that have been raised by the Independent Māori Statutory Board. I think we've gone a long way towards that, but I've not heard that the original motion needed to be amended. So what is being referred to by Councillor Walker is fee simple land. My understanding is fee simple land as opposed to road reserve land. We did not give an instruction to go beyond the scope of road reserve. So I haven't heard you say to me or the officers prior that you wanted the scope extended. So it is a bit late now, and we've got the work that's already been undertaken.
Not be too difficult to add on. I would suggest there'd be huge community support for this, and it's highly desirable. If we have an urban forest strategy, if we have other strategies that are looking to enhance the natural environment, then and we're interested in enhancing the social, the cultural, the environmental fabric, and there are areas of land that could be at least considered, then this is a mechanism to do it. And I don't think it's too late to add it. I mean, this is a process that we're engaged with here. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Reedy, but it's early days yet, isn't it?
So, through the chair, it's difficult in the absence of seeing an amendment to know how to respond to the proposal. It is beyond the scope of what we were originally tasked with doing, which was looking at unformed areas of road reserve, broadening that out to other pieces of land that Auckland Transport has as an asset, or other CCOs, and the mechanism by which those opportunities might be investigated. At this point in time, not familiar enough with those processes to recommend how to amend the current resolutions, but if there is an amendment, we could see if we can respond if there's one that goes up. But it is, I guess, as I understand it, seeking that Auckland Transport looks at these bits of land, or potentially Panuku or others, and the process around that, we're just probably a little bit on the...
Look, my understanding
responding on the hoof.
is they are.
Yep.
Councillor Cashmore?
I just want to make that sort of clear. This is a first stage of probably quite a huge piece of work. So I know Auckland Transport looked at doing this work. Last term it came an absolute nightmare for them, so they backed off it. And now we're saying, let's look at the ones that have access ways to walkways, to significant natural areas of native bush or estuaries and so forth. Let's pick those ones, find those ones that we can activate, and then there'll be further work going on, perhaps some of the stuff that Councillor Walker is talking about. Would that be a fair summation?
Yes, that's a good summary, yes.
I mean...
Sorry, no, it's not your turn.
Okay, will you just let
Please.
me know when it is?
Members, we need to adjourn. I'm sorry, I've run over 5 minutes. My apologies. We need to adjourn, and we'll be back here just shortly after 1 o'clock. Say 1:05. We'll stand adjourned until then.